So, how did social aspects in your childhood affect your political decisions in adulthood?
So, as a kid, growing up in England, the street that we lived on, the school that I went to, there were six kids actually. Um, I was one of three from my own household, and there was another three from another household. We were the only kids that looked like us. And so we didn't, although we were kids, we didn't really understand the social injustices against people like us. And it wasn't until we moved to the US and moved to an area that was predominantly black that I realized how much there was such social discourse, how black people were, if not mistreated, but the social ill wills. And so I became a lot more aware of how people looked or treated me just by the color of my skin. And it was actually very odd because I also felt that within my own race, especially for someone who speaks differently. And then as I went on to college, I went to a school that was not predominantly black and found myself wanting to be a part of an organization, the Black United Body, as a matter of fact, wanted to be a part of something that made a difference. And so as I went through college life, I was not politically involved, but I wanted to be aware of the social injustices. And then as I became older, I realized I wanted to be a part of something. I wanted to see how I could make a difference and try to understand political policies and how it affects me and people like me. And so I became involved in political activities to try and raise awareness of certain social injustices. But it took being in diverse backgrounds to realize um, what it was like to be me.
Do you believe that these factors contributing to your race and the struggle that you went through developed your political identity? Or do you believe there's more deciding factors that played into that part?
Well, there are definitely more deciding factors. But one of the things that I realized is that there's discourse between races and amongst the race. And that a lot of times there's a lot of misunderstandings because we don't take the time to really understand and learn about each other. For example, I remember being in college and I had an apartment. So I had one of my good friends and then we were paired with someone else. And my roommate was from a very small town, from Maine, I believe, and she didn't have a street address, anything. It was just small town USA. Anyway, she didn't realize that my skin wasn't the way it was. She just believed that people didn't bathe, black people didn't bathe. And so it was through living with me that she realized that we were more alike than we were different. And so in doing that, I realized that sometimes we go really along party lines because what we believe to be true as opposed to what we know to be true. And I wanted to just do more awareness to help people understand that we really are a lot more alike than we are different.
So, growing up, the economic background that you went through wasn't the best of situations. You didn't grow up in a rich neighborhood. You
No.
didn't at all. You grew up in a not poor but underdeveloped neighborhood or
Very
community.
underdeveloped. Ironically enough, we moved from a developed neighborhood in England to an undeveloped, predominantly black neighborhood in the US. And even within that neighborhood, there were classes depending on which side of town you lived on. If you lived on a certain side, then you were considered a lot more upper class than those who lived in the projects. I mean, there was different economic levels, and it was very evident amongst the students that went to school between who wore the latest what, who had the latest this, who drove what car, who didn't have a car, even with lunch. Ironic as it may seem, if you were on a lunch program that was frowned upon, it was better to just buy lunch because you didn't want to be considered part of a lower social class. So you'd rather go and not eat than to be on a lunch program. So it was just really interesting learning all of that as a kid to see how all of these social norms get to shape who you become.
So in this community, in this neighborhood, when most people think of an underdeveloped neighborhood, or they think of like a ghetto, and when they think of a ghetto, they think of major violence. So did you experience a lot of violence, or is that just the thought that most people have when they think of the community like what you lived in?
I think that's the thought that most people had. Did violence exist? Sure. But violence exists everywhere. But I was never afraid to walk home. I was never afraid to walk home at night. Not just because I lived there, but it was also a very small town. It was only 2.2 square miles. So you literally could walk from one end to the other. Everybody pretty much knew each other. And so while you had the really poor sections that you stayed out of for the most part, because like any town, if there is a poverty level or social strife, you don't want to be a part of that particular area because there's no good that can come out of that, because it's usually things that were going on that you didn't want to be a part of. But I think people believe that those that come from underdeveloped areas, that there's no good that come out of it, that is all, whether it's drugs or gun violence or anything, that's all that exists, and that's absolutely not true.